The hall had been busy since morning, filled with parents, teachers, and young performers carrying hope in their eyes. It was one of those regional music competitions where every participant dreamed of being noticed. But as the hours passed, the excitement slowly faded. The same difficult piano piece kept returning, and every contestant tried their best, yet none of them could complete it. Some got stuck in the middle, some lost their confidence, and some simply froze under pressure. By afternoon, the judges looked exhausted. They had heard the same piece so many times that the melody itself felt broken. Most people in the audience could feel the heaviness in the air. There was no laughter, no whispers of excitement, nothing. Only the soft squeaks of chairs and the occasional sighs from parents who hoped their child might stand out today. But the piece chosen for the advanced category was extremely hard, something only well-trained pianists usually attempted. Even teenagers with years of experience struggled with it. So expecting perfection was almost unrealistic. The judges had entered the day with optimism, but now they exchanged tired looks. One judge rubbed his forehead and leaned back, whispering something to the others about ending the session early because, according to him, today just isn't the day. Another judge shook her head, telling him to give it a little more time, but even she didn't sound convinced. They all knew how difficult this piece was, and after listening to several failed attempts, they silently agreed that there was not much hope left. After the last contestant walked off the stage, the hall grew unusually quiet. People thought the round was over. A few parents even began gathering their kids' bags. One judge started closing the file in front of him. Another stretched her arms, relieved that the long day might finally end. It felt like the final moment of a tiring shift, but then, just as the judges were ready to wrap up, a small figure stepped forward from the side of the stage. An 8-year-old child walked toward the piano with slow, careful steps. He wore simple clothes and carried no expression of fear or nervousness. His face showed calmness almost, too calm for a child waiting to face a panel of judges. The judges noticed him and looked confused. One of them asked politely, "Are you here for the next group?" thinking the boy had walked onto the stage by mistake. But the child simply nodded and gently said he was here for the same piece. The words surprised everyone. A few people in the audience turned their heads, some even whispered to each other, wondering if this was a joke. After all, the piece had challenged and defeated much older participants. An 8-year-old attempting it sounded almost unreal. The judges exchanged glances again, but this time it wasn't frustration, it was disbelief mixed with curiosity. One judge asked the coordinator if the child had been registered. The coordinator confirmed he was indeed on the list but had been scheduled near the end. Somehow, his turn had been overlooked in the confusion of the long day, with no option but to proceed. The judges reopened their files and leaned forward, trying to adjust their tired minds. Their expectations were low. In fact, they had already seen trained players struggle earlier, so they assumed this child would barely get through the first few notes. Some audience members smiled sympathetically, thinking the little one was about to face a tough moment, but while everyone doubted him, the child quietly pulled the piano bench forward. He sat down carefully, placing his small feet where the pedals barely reached. His hands rested softly on his lap as he took a slow breath. He didn't look nervous. It was as if he had done this 100 times before. He lifted his hands and gently placed them on the keys, the same keys that had intimidated so many earlier. Few people in the audience knew anything about his background. They didn't know he had started touching a piano when he was just 4. They didn't know his father, a simple school teacher, had noticed his unusual listening ability, how the child could hear a tune once and recreate it almost exactly. They didn't know that he practiced quietly every evening when the world around him got busy with their own lives. For years, the family had kept his gift private, not out of fear, but because they believed talent grows better in silence than in noise. This competition was the first time the child had ever played in front of strangers. As he sat on the bench, he didn't think about winning. He didn't think about judges, audience, pressure, or expectations. He only thought about the music, about how the melody had lived inside his mind for months. He had practiced the piece slowly, then faster, then with his eyes closed, then with no lights in the room. He had explored every corner of the music until it became part of him. The hall stayed silent as he prepared. One judge sighed softly, expecting another incomplete attempt. Another judge rested her chin on her hand, half ready to write the usual comments. "Good try, but needs more practice." A few parents whispered, thinking the child would probably get nervous halfway through and leave the stage early. Some teenagers in the audience who had struggled with the same piece earlier watched with mixed feelings, surprised, confused, maybe even slightly uncertain about how a child this young could attempt something so complicated. Then something interesting happened. Just before playing, the child closed his eyes, not tightly, just gently, like he was taking a peaceful pause. His fingers hovered above the keys, steady and relaxed. The judges, despite being tired, noticed the confidence in his posture. There was no trembling in his hands, no stiffness in his shoulders, nothing that showed nervousness. He pressed the first key, da, and in that exact moment, something changed in the room. The very first note came out clean and controlled. Not loud, not forced, just perfectly balanced. It wasn't the kind of beginning you hear from someone unsure. It was the kind that comes from a player who understands not just the notes, but the soul of the piece. The judges, who had been leaning back moments earlier, instinctively straightened in their seats. Their tired expressions softened, replaced by surprise. The second note followed, then the third, forming the opening melody. The judges exchanged looks, not saying anything but clearly thinking the same thing. This is different. The audience, too, felt something shift. A mother in the second row glanced at her son, her eyebrows raised. A teenager who had failed earlier leaned forward, listening more carefully. By the time the child reached the first transition section, it was already clear that this was not an ordinary performance. His fingers moved with confidence, not rushing, not hesitating. Every note was placed with purpose. Every phrase was shaped with emotion. It almost looked unreal. An 8-year-old playing a piece known for its difficulty, with ease that even adults struggled to achieve, but no one knew yet what was coming next, the moment that would silence the entire hall and force the judges to rethink everything they believed about age, talent, and possibility. That moment was only a few seconds away, and the hall, without realizing it, had already started to hold its breath. The silence in the hall was almost tangible. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the small figure at the piano. The air seemed heavier than before, not in a bad way, but as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The child's fingers moved across the keys with astonishing speed, yet each note was precise, deliberate, and full of expression. It was a melody that felt alive, breathing, and every sound seemed to tell a story all on its own. People in the audience began leaning forward, drawn in by something they hadn't expected. They had seen him start well, but this level of control was extraordinary. The judges, who had moments ago been ready to close the session, now sat frozen. One leaned slightly forward, her pen resting untouched on the scoring sheet. Another's eyes widened, not with disbelief alone, but with an almost childlike wonder. They had seen many talented performers over the years, but something about this young child was different, something they could not explain. As the child approached the middle section of the piece, the part that had stopped almost everyone else, a hush fell over the room. It was the section that tested the limits of rhythm, timing, and dexterity, the one that had made older contestants stumble and falter. The judges had already assumed he would hit the same wall. Parents exchanged worried glances. Some thought maybe he would stop halfway, embarrassed or overwhelmed. But the child didn't even pause. His fingers danced over the keys, hitting every note with a clarity that made it sound as if he was telling a story rather than playing music. Every note seemed to have been planned. Every chord carried emotion. The audience, who had been silent for so long, started to feel the music in their hearts. A mother in the front row closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her. A teenager in the back, who had failed the piece himself just an hour ago, felt a mix of awe and hope. It wasn't just skill, it was something more. It was pure expression, a talent so rare that it made everyone forget about the age of the person at the piano. The judges could no longer hide their amazement. One judge whispered under her breath, "I've never heard anything like this." Another simply shook his head, unable to form words. He had expected mistakes, stumbles, and a performance that would be incomplete at best. Instead, what he heard was flawless execution, a young mind translating years of quiet practice into a performance that resonated with everyone present. By the time the child reached the final segment of the piece, the room had completely transformed. People were no longer sitting back passively. They were leaning in, captivated. The music wasn't just heard, it was felt. It was as if the hall itself was alive, vibrating with the emotion of the performance. The small child at the piano seemed larger than life, his size irrelevant compared to the magnitude of his gift. The audience's reactions were subtle at first. Some whispered softly to each other, unsure if they were witnessing reality. But as the melody built, those whispers became audible gasps, then exclamations of surprise. A few parents had tears in their eyes. Even the teenagers, often critical and jaded, looked at him with admiration. The room had shifted from quiet boredom and disappointment to full-on amazement. Every person present understood that what they were hearing was extraordinary. The judges, who had moments ago been ready to give up entirely, now leaned forward, their eyes glued to the child's hands. They could see the confidence in every movement, the absolute control in every chord, and the passion that came through even in the smallest gestures. One judge tapped the scoring sheet nervously, as if writing something down might help them make sense of what was happening. Another clasped her hands together, overwhelmed by the purity of the performance, and then it happened, the final note. It wasn't just a note. It was the ending of a story, the conclusion of a journey that had started with doubt and ended in sheer brilliance. The child's fingers lifted gently from the keys, and the room held its breath for the tiniest moment. Then, slowly, realization swept through the hall. The piece was complete, perfect, flawless. For a second, no one moved. Not a clap, not a cheer, not a whisper. The audience seemed frozen in awe. The judges, still trying to process what they had witnessed, stared at the piano, mouths slightly open. Even the child sat still, taking a gentle breath, unaware of the effect he had created. He had simply done what he had come to do, play the music as it lived in his mind. Then the applause erupted. It started softly, a ripple of clapping from the back rows, then swelling into a full wave of sound that filled every corner of the hall. People stood, cheering and clapping with a mix of joy, surprise, and admiration. Some audience members were wiping tears from their eyes. The hall echoed with the sound of excitement, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had paused to witness this moment. The judges finally stood as well, giving him a rare standing ovation. One judge, normally strict and critical, approached him and whispered words of encouragement and praise, almost speechless. Another smiled widely, shaking his head in disbelief and nodding repeatedly, as if trying to convince himself that what he had just heard was real. They admitted openly that they had doubted him, that they had assumed the challenge was too great for anyone, let alone a child. But now they were humbled and inspired. The child, still calm and composed, gave a small bow. He didn't boast, he didn't seek attention. He simply acknowledged the appreciation with grace. He understood the music, and that was all that mattered to him. His performance had been about the melody, the rhythm, and the story hidden inside the piece. Everything else, the applause, the astonishment, the praise was secondary. People began approaching him after the performance. Some with questions about how he learned to play, others with compliments about his talent. Parents asked for tips for their own children, students wanted advice, and even the judges couldn't stop discussing the performance. It wasn't just another day at a competition anymore. It was a moment that would be remembered and retold for years to come. The story of this 8-year-old child prodigy quickly spread beyond the hall. Teachers, parents, and students shared videos and talked about the performance online. Social media buzzed with admiration for someone so young performing something so challenging. People who had never attended the competition wanted to see what they had missed. and many young musicians found themselves inspired to practice harder and dream bigger. In that small hall. For those few minutes, something magical had happened. A room that had been filled with doubt and disappointment transformed into a space of wonder and inspiration. Everyone realized that age was not a limitation, that dedication and passion could overcome expectations, and that sometimes talent appears in the most unexpected forms. By the end of the day, the competition had a new story to tell. The child had not only completed the piece but had left a mark on everyone present. The judges returned to their scoring sheets, but their comments were different now. Words like amazing, unbelievable, and inspirational appeared repeatedly. The audience left talking animatedly, sharing what they had witnessed. And somewhere in the corner, the child quietly packed up, a small smile on his face. Satisfied that he had shared the music he loved, that day was a reminder to all who had witnessed it that talent, determination, and the love of what you do can shine brighter than any doubt. No matter how difficult something seems, with focus, practice, and heart, even the impossible can be achieved. And sometimes the most extraordinary performances come from those we least expect, the small, quiet ones who have nurtured their gift in silence, only to reveal it in a moment of brilliance. The judges had been ready to give up. The audience had almost lost hope, and the hall had been filled with exhaustion and disappointment. But in a matter of seconds, an 8-year-old child prodigy had changed everything. And in that change, the room discovered something greater than skill alone, the magic of raw, undeniable talent meeting courage and opportunity, leaving everyone present both amazed and inspired.